Hello. I'm going to give a few minutes folks to enter. Okay, good afternoon. Well, actually, good afternoon where I am. Good morning from Australia. My name is Mimi Hicklin, and I am the program coordinator at the Charter for Compassion, and I'm so happy to be here with all of you today. Every month, the Charter hosts a webinar featuring the work of one of our compassionate communities. And today we have the absolute delight of speaking with a team from Compassionate Australia. Australia is our first official continent of compassion, and I'm really excited for them to share some of the history and challenges and successes along the way to this point. I know there's a lot to talk about, so I don't want to take up too much time, but I do want to address a few housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar is being recorded, and everyone who registered will receive a copy of that in your inbox. So look for an email from the Charter for Compassion in the next few days. We have allowed for time for questions following the presentation. So please put those questions in the chat box, which for me is on the bottom of my Zoom screen. When I hover, there's a little chat icon. I know Zoom is making all sorts of updates, so it may be at the top of your screen. And you can post questions or comments there throughout the presentation, and we will address them at the end. Okay, I think that's it. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Lynn.
Good, thank you, Mimi. Australian Compassion Council is very pleased to be here today to contribute to the Charter's Communities webinar series. And I'll hand now to Terry, who's going to do an introductory compassionate pause.
Good morning, everybody. I'm coming to you from the Bunya Mountains in Queensland, southeastern Queensland, which is the sacred lands for our First Nations people. And it's customary for us to acknowledge them and their stewardship and custodianship of the land as we do. We're going to start first with a compassionate acknowledgement of our first and last peoples. As we gather, we acknowledge that for thousands of years, Indigenous people have lived on this land, their country. Their relationship with the land is at the very centre of their lives. Their spirituality is inextricably connected to ours. We acknowledge the people here of the Waka Waka language group, and we pay our respects to their leaders, past, present, and emerging. With compassion, we acknowledge their stewardship as custodians of the land. It is with gratitude that we share this land today, with sorrow that we acknowledge the cost of that sharing, and with hope that we can move forward together to a place of deep listening, of justice, and enduring peace. And it is with compassion that we also acknowledge our last peoples, those who have recently arrived into our country, and those who have yet to arrive, held in offshore detention centres in other places, fleeing persecution, torment and war, in search of a safe place to live, work, worship, and raise their children. We grieve at their loss of place and home. We are horrified by our inhumanity to one another, even our own. And we offer them the hand of welcome and hospitality, knowing that our being here together makes us all more human, more civil, and more compassionate. These are our concerns, our hopes, and our prayers, and so let it be. Thank you, Lynn.
Good, thank you, Terry. So my name is Lynn Reader, and I'm the National Lead for the Australian Compassion Council, and I am based here in Ballarat in regional Victoria. And today I'm presenting with Terry Ailing, the national lead of the ACC Cities program, who's normally based on the Gold Coast in Queensland, with Dr. Debbie Ling, who's based in Melbourne, and Dr. Sue Sumskus in Wollongong. We also, the other members of our committee are Gwen Pinnington, who is based in Hobart, Tasmania, and Mark Crosweller in the Australian Capital Territory. And so they aren't able to be here today, but they send their best wishes. Before we start, I would also like to acknowledge the Indigenous lands on which I am situated, the Wathaurong lands, paying respect to elders past, present, and emerging. So in this presentation, we will be going through the ways in which the ACC is embedding, Australian Compassion Council is embedding both the value and the new science of compassion into its work as we deep dream Australia a continent for compassion. We are focused on a continent because that geographic space recognises our deep level of interdependence, the space where we can best participate in our common humanity, whether that occurs on our local streets, in our suburbs or cities, or indeed across our continent. Our national ambassador is the well-known social scientist Hugh Mackay, and in his book, Australia Reimagined Towards a More Compassionate and Less Anxious Society, Hugh states, "It's easy to be kind towards those we like, not so easy towards those we don't like. And yet how we respond to those we don't like is the ultimate test of our commitment to the civilising discipline of compassion." So how do we bring compassion into the work of the Charter in Australia? Well, there are three main ways we are doing that. Through our Compassionate Cities program, our work with the Charter sectors, and through our National Day of Compassion. We'll go through these in more detail as we go through this presentation, but first let me provide a very short background to my individual journey with the Charter. As an academic and compassion researcher, that started when I attended the Science of Compassion conference at Stanford University. Its Research Centre for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education, CCARE, was founded by the neuroscientist Dr. James Doty, and that centre is funded by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. That is where I also came across the Charter as Karen Armstrong spoke at a Charter event run at the time of this conference. Indeed, it was the Charter that created this series of one-day forums in 2014. And since then, Terry and I have travelled to the US a number of times, and that has provided us with many Charter contacts, close associates, and ideas. And we have also been very fortunate that the Charter CEO, Marilyn Turkovich, has travelled to Australia. And from these close connections, we have formulated our strategies to deep dream Australia a continent for compassion. We'll come back to those plans, but first I wanted to hand over to Debbie and Sue, who will take you through our approach to compassion in more detail. Thanks, Debbie and Sue.
Thanks, Lynn. I'd like to talk a little bit about what we've been doing with compassion. Certainly we see common humanity as the foundation of universal unbiased compassion, and we're also framing it within the context of the need for compassion, common humanity and wisdom. So we need to be discerning in the areas where there needs to be compassion, and as we know, there are multiple ways in which compassionate action can be framed. So there's it can be a challenge sometimes in terms of when there are difficult circumstances to work out what's the most constructive compassionate action, but equally that can vary across sectors, and we hope today that there are multiple examples of that coming into play. One of the things we're doing is we're having a range of global partnerships that have been occurring as well through the Charter, and which has been very exciting. So I actually did my PhD on compassion and common humanity at Monash University, which is Australia's largest public research university. And we're thrilled to have been given a $12 million philanthropic grant to establish the Centre for Consciousness and Contemplative Studies, which has as its core aim common humanity. And this is a world-first interdisciplinary collaboration between philosophy, medicine, neuroscience, education, and interfaith. And we'll be bringing 3 different lenses to common humanity, which will be research, education, and community engagement. And so the whole compassion and common humanity area has really been taking off, which is very exciting, with a big emphasis on bringing compassion and common humanity into training, curriculum, health professions curriculum. We're developing a compassion training for healthcare workers, which will be marketed locally and internationally. And we're aiming to scale that up because there's such need for compassion in healthcare, particularly with COVID. There's lots of workers who are under enormous strain. So that's a very exciting collaboration. And our first run of that course will be 7th of March next year, and it'll be announced through the centre early in the year. And there's also been opportunities to collaborate with international centres. As everyone knows, compassion is really taking off around the world, and University of Plymouth have established a collaboration for compassion in healthcare education. It's been exciting. They reached out to us at Monash and have asked us to join with them, and I'm one of the members of that centre, and they're also really doing a strong push to bring compassion into healthcare education. So I'll throw to Sue now for some more comments.
Thanks, Debbie. I'm Sue Sumskis from the Nantian Institute in Australia, which is a Buddhist-based higher education institute. And we're working in very similar ways to what Debbie was talking about, because we recognise that the research base of compassion is vital. It pushes us to understand how we've structured the world and ask how we can structure it better. And not because we ourselves might suffer, but because others are suffering, many others are suffering. And while the research is forging ahead in contexts such as healthcare and education, it's really important for understanding how organisations may better serve society to reduce rather than cause suffering, because we do have organisationally caused suffering happening not only in Australia but around the globe. And so we've got increasingly difficult and challenging circumstances. So the compassion is being recognised as a really important counter for the negative consequences of occupational syndromes such as burnout and empathic distress. And we've seen this really escalating under the conditions that COVID has put across the globe. And it's also very important as a restorative element for traumatised organisations and for people needing trauma-informed care, which is increasingly recognised as well. So research can help us to see how past choices and pressures have made compassion an elusive, complicated and poorly understood entity. And whilst the research has grown exponentially in the past decade, it really needs the type of focus that's now coming towards it with dedicated funding, dedicated centres, etc. So in Australia, we formed the Compassion Scholars Research Group to support compassionate work across our continent. And we're having a compassion research conference on Wednesday, the 17th of November, 2021, which we would invite you all to come and attend. You can find details about that on our website. We're going to have some really interesting and exciting presenters, such as Professor Paul Gilbert, who's founder of the Compassionate Mind Foundation from the University of Derby in the UK, and Professor Tanya Singer from the Neuroscience Lab at the Max Planck Society in Berlin. I'll also be speaking at the conference on work that we're currently doing at the Nantian Institute on compassion in leadership, including in healthcare, education and policing, and also compassion in the workplace and compassionate self-care and professional attitudes, which is part of our healthcare curriculum. So to progress some of this compassion research, we're pleased to announce that the Australian Compassion Scholars Network and the University of Sydney are launching a call out for input into a special issue of the Australian Journal of Management on compassion in organisations. So the title of this special issue will be Managing with Compassion in a Complex Changing World, New Research and Application. And we invite compassion scholars to submit an abstract for consideration and the deadline of this will be March 2022. And again, if you would like some more details about that, please have a look at our website. We really have a number of exciting compassion research initiatives happening in Australia, and we invite you to come to our website and have a look more. Thank you. And Lena, I'll hand back to you.
Good, thanks, Sue, thanks. As I mentioned, the ACC has three main ways of deep dreaming Australia a continent for compassion: through our Compassionate Cities program, our work in the charter sectors, and through our National Day of Compassion. We'll come back to the specifics of the National Day, but for now I'll hand over to Terry, who will speak more about our strategy. Oh, Terry, can you?
Yes, yeah. Lynn started to tell us about some of the history of how we come to this point in the deep dreaming Australia, a continent for compassion. And on the 21st of September this year, we were delighted to launch that aspiration. It was a moment along a journey that's been unfolding for some time, but we realized that we were actually very much caught up in a much deeper dreaming that has its heart and soul in this land and in its people, and many people that have dreamed this dream before. So on the 21st of September 2021, we had a launch event, and we had that followed by 12 hours of recorded presentations representing the compassionate work that's happening all across the country in the different sectors of our work. One of the things that we were very conscious of in this audacious claim, deep dreaming Australia, a continent for compassion, is that there are many hurts in our Australian society that still need to be healed. That's why we start each of our gatherings with a compassionate acknowledgement of our first and last people, because amongst the deepest hurts are the hurts for our First Nations people, who are the longest surviving continuous community on the planet, dating back almost 60,000 years. I'm in the Bunya Mountains today, and part of a conversation that is unfolding about how we tell the truth about our history, a very short white history, but a very long Indigenous history, about how we give voice to the wisdom and the experience and the stories of our First Nations people, and how together we can partner them in seeking a treaty that would recognise not only them in the Constitution and give them a voice, but give them the valid place that they deserve in Australian society. There are deep hurts amongst our First Nations people, and the Australian Compassion Council see that this is part of our work in understanding and sharing stories and working alongside other partners that can help to heal those hurts. In the same way, for our most recent residents, refugees and migrants, we've had a very patchy history about how well we have managed and integrated those people. And so it's another dimension of our work. But there are many other hurts and places for healing across our society. Isolation, mental health, suicide, anxiety, homelessness, domestic and family violence. And the work of the Charter for Compassion and our statement about deep dreaming Australia, a continent for compassion, acknowledges that there's still a work to be done. This dream is a dream that's been in the hearts of many people for a long time. We've been caught up in it, and it will continue to unfold for years to come. But the Australian Compassion Council is committed to working with other partners to not only identify those hurting places, but to heal them as well. In the next 12 months, we are going to commit ourselves to seeking the broadest representation we can across our country. The Australian Compassion Council doesn't at this stage include representatives from South Australia, from Western Australia, or from the Northern Territory. So we'll be looking to ensure that our continent of compassion is well represented on the Australian Compassion Council. We also feel that to grow forward our sectors, it's important that we designate sector leads. The unique thing, as you know, about the Charter for Compassion and its cities work in particular, is that it's a multi-sectorial approach. It's not just, whilst it might have been led by one sector, it needs to be carried forward in each of the sectors. So by intentionally identifying and releasing sector leads, we can grow forward all the aspects of this work. Finally, and firstly, back to the wisdom of our First Nations people. Tyson Yunker Porter, a very wise Indigenous elder and author, his book Sand Talk, Indigenous Wisdom, is working with the Australian Compassion Council to help us understand what he calls the 5 minds of how we can listen deeply to story, how we can listen deeply to each other, and how we can wisely and mindfully move forward together. So we're not only honouring the hurts and doing what we can to heal those hurts, but we're trying to align the work of the Australian Compassion Council to that deep wisdom that exists amongst our First Nations people.
Thanks, Terry. Yeah, I'll just go through those 5 mindsets. We're very fortunate that this is the way we work with the Global Charter, that indeed the Global Charter had our Indigenous advisor, Al Harris, in conversation with Tyson about his book as part of their global read. And that was a very successful global read, and really listening to 2 Indigenous people speak about these ways of thinking was just a magical experience. So as Terry said, we are committed to embedding the 5 Indigenous mindsets into our work, and these mindsets include kinship mind. That's around relationship and connectedness, the idea that nothing exists outside a relationship to something else. Story mind, which brings in the role of narrative into memory and knowledge transmission. Dreaming mind, that draws on the use of metaphors, images, culture and rituals in any knowledge transfer. Ancestor mind, which brings a very deep engagement and to connect with a timeless, not linear state of mind. And finally, pattern mind, which is seeing entire systems and trends, and then seeing the patterns within them to find a holistic solution to those very complex problems that Debbie and Sue mentioned. They're just some of those issues that the world is dealing with at the moment. And to bring these precious mindsets to that, our thinking is very much how one of the important ways in which we are deep dreaming Australia a continent for compassion. And we thought now to ground some of this big picture thinking that I'd go into an example of how that work is being applied in one of our compassionate cities. So I'll give you an example of Compassionate Ballarat. Ballarat is my hometown, and in establishing Compassionate Ballarat, our steering group followed the Charter's model of first identifying the hurting places. Terry spoke about the hurting places in Australia. So we looked at the ways in which, how could we identify those in Ballarat? The way we did that was to run 4 community forums in the areas of compassionate leadership, education, healthcare, and the components of a compassionate city. Over 400 local residents attended these forums, and the issues they identified were high suicide levels, low literacy rates in some areas, high economic inequality, the growing number of homelessness, in particular with older women. Because we're a rapidly growing population, we're about 100,000 people, about an hour and a half out of the capital city of Victoria. So we've got rising tensions between new and old residents, because Ballarat was established in the 1850s. Our current and historic Indigenous harms, the ongoing impact of institutional child sex abuse in Australia. Often Ballarat is referred to as Australia's Boston, and youth disengagement and lack of meaning. So these are the issues that inform the activities of Compassionate Ballarat as we apply the value and evidence base of compassion across these hurting places, but also through the charter sectors, which are, include education, healthcare, peace, and the arts. The focus of Compassionate Ballarat is to develop and nurture our city's social infrastructure, because building a compassion within a community helps to create a sense of belonging and motivates people to take responsibility for and care for each other. The Ballarat Hospital, which is a very large regional health hub, auspices our work. And when they made the decision to support the work of Compassionate Ballarat, the CEO put out a public statement noting that we are in the business of healing and care. Individually, we provide almost 6 million hours of care to our community each year, but the needs of our community are beyond our capabilities. If, as a compassionate city, we could collectively work with others to have the common goals of easing the suffering of those in our community, the opportunities afforded would be far greater. Lifting our collective capacity to support those who are suffering must be the mark of a community that we would all aspire to contribute to. The Ballarat City Council formally signed the Charter in 2019, and we're very privileged that they have taken that signing very seriously. The Council has documented compassion into its strategic planning documents, including in its prosperity strategy and its art and culture strategy. The specific reference in the prosperity statement reads, "Our vision is that we are a compassionate city, powered by a community with a high level of emotional intelligence, where community connection, health, and well-being are some of our highest priorities, and this in turn enables strong civic participation and open-mindedness." So the city has been wonderful to work with. We have also the support of the CEOs and leaders across our community, and that is in part because they consistently tell us that implementing compassionate leadership is timely. We often hear that statement, "This work is timely." Therefore, Compassionate Ballarat has a focus on resourcing our city leaders, and to do that, we developed a CEO group because, as Paul Gilbert from the Compassionate Mind Foundation UK notes, if we want to have the minds and brains that are going to solve the complex problems of the world, then we need ones that are compassionate. Over the past 3 years, we have held many CEO sessions and have been pleasantly surprised that these busy CEOs consistently come to these meetings, recently, of course, being held via webinars. And the feedback from this CEO of a local fire authority gives some indication of why. So Brett noted, "My organisation is in the middle of a difficult restructure process at present. I personally find the use of compassionate leadership techniques particularly valuable. Partnering with Compassionate Ballarat or participating in Compassionate Ballarat events and forums has been a highlight, and I'm grateful for being included." So as I mentioned, the Australian Compassion Council has 3 main strategies, and the third strategy was our National Day of Compassion. Terry has mentioned, has referenced that. We held it only a week or so ago, and we had that live event and then those 12-hour Facebook streaming. So I was going to hand over now to Debbie to talk about the ways in which that work is happening. Thanks, Debbie.
So what we found with our National Day of Compassion, it was a fantastic impetus for us to go and source people and organisations within Australia who are doing compassionate work in this space. And as we all know, there's a lot of work that's always going on that ourselves as Charter for Compassion Australia, but even the general public may not be aware of. So individually, the members of the Australian Compassion Council, we interviewed a wide range of people and organisations. It was very inspiring to hear about the work that's been done. And it's very exciting because we were able to capture over 60 hours of videos across multiple sectors with a range of people and organisations. This is a fantastic resource that we have that we've uploaded to our Charter for Compassion Australia website, and it's placed there in different sectors so that any visitors to our website can come along and hear all these broad range of stories. They're able to get in touch with some of the different people or organisations who've shared their compassionate work. So we feel that it's been a really valuable exercise in helping connect people and organisations who have compassion as their core value and aim, because one of our aims, of course, in Australia is to continue to grow and network our work. And so particularly this year, the event has been a huge kind of step up for helping us, because we've networked with so many different organisations and people. And we think it's going to be a very exciting next few years forward. And what we're doing is we're streaming over the next 9 weeks on Facebook. Each sector each week will be broadcast on Facebook, and we'll have the details on our website where you'll be able to find more information about that. And we're also in discussions as a council about how to continue to build on the resource that we have, share them with the people of Australia, use it as a platform to help inform people about the work that's going on already, how to network with each other. And as has been mentioned, it's so important for us to look at both bottom-up and top-down approaches. And one of our aims is aiming to try and make influence in policy, organisations, leadership. And we feel that we have a fantastic resource there. As well on our website too, we have under our sectors, we've also got different resources there that members of the general public who might just be wanting to come along and find out a bit about compassion or common humanity training, they're able to log on and have a look. There's free training that's available, free resources, downloadable PowerPoints. So we're really looking at moving forward with these resources, and we've been very excited at what we were able to achieve this year with our National Day of Compassion. Thanks, Lynn.
Good, thank you. So these are just some of the ways in which the ACC is highlighting and applying the important work of compassion across our continent. We're very grateful to the Global Charter. As I said, Marilyn has actually, has been here in Australia and supported our work. Mimi does a fantastic job of anything that we're wanting to do with sending out newsletters and information. And Felipe on IT has been mentioned, that we'll be running those webinars on Facebook. So we particularly wanted to thank the Charter, because it's just amazing the work that they, that we can do our work, because we are very much supported in doing that. So if there are any questions, we'd be happy to take questions.
Let's give folks an opportunity to write those in chat. Thank you, Compassion Australia, for such a thorough and engaging presentation. I'm wondering, you touched on this a little bit, but I'm wondering if you want to go a little more in depth about work that you've done with the Charter, the Global Charter for Compassion.
Yes, I think certainly the partnerships, we're aware of the global partnerships that the Charter have developed, and often that allows us to connect. So Terry, I wondered if you wanted to talk about the compassionate communities and the work that you're doing with John Rosenberg. And so having that at a global level, we can transfer it to a national and then to a city level as well.
Yes, I think one of the things that we've been very grateful for Marilyn's leadership and the work of the Global Charter is helping us to reflect on the way in which we can intentionally kind of grow signatories to the Charter document itself, for people to join as partners, and for cities to join the Compassionate Cities project. And I think early on, it would be fair to say that we were really quite keen on measuring our effectiveness by, the number of signatories that we had, the number of partners we had, and the number of cities we had. And to some extent, we possibly feel as if we'd failed in that. However, we've taken a different approach, the approach that Debbie referred to earlier, with identifying the compassionate people, organisations and communities and cities work that's happening already right across the country, and to honouring those stories. And so our strategy was to go to those people intentionally and to say, look, we really want to share the story of what's happening in your organisation or in your community. We acknowledge that that's compassionate work and it aligns to the values of the Charter. It's the kind of thing that our partners sign up for, and it's the kind of reason that you would join as a city. And as part of that process of storytelling, I think it's increased the profile of the Charter for Compassion. And it's also given us not only resources that we can kind of upload to our websites, but relationships with those people where we can explore what their future relationship, either as individuals, as partners, or as cities, may be with our kind of Charter work. So whilst we haven't given up on the aspiration to sign up people for partners and for cities, we've also been creative and acknowledging those compassionate cities. I'm in the Bunya Mountains at the moment, but it's close to one of the compassionate cities of Australia that's been very welcoming of refugees, and integrating those refugees and migrants very well. They haven't signed the Charter for Compassion, but we want to share their story of being a compassionate city in the hope that we will continue to align that kind of work. As Lynn said, the partnership with the Global Charter also gives us the capacity to leverage off our local connections with international connections. So one of those connections is through our healthcare sector, and particularly through the end of life, care at the end of life. And we have connected with an organisation called Public Health Palliative Care International, which is a global organisation that also has an aspiration for creating compassionate cities. And it's really about helping those cities develop compassion as a way for caring for people at the end of life. We see that the compassionate cities movement of the Charter for Compassion is clearly closely aligned with that, because health, care, and the skills required to care for people at the end of life are very closely aligned. But we also see that the work of the Charter for Compassion is a multi-sectorial work, not only in healthcare and education, social services, and a whole range of other areas. So we are able to work collaboratively together with organisations like that locally, get stuff happening on the ground here, be a part of their national days and global presentations, and use those stories to influence the partnerships and networks right across the globe.
Wow, thank you. It's funny that or coincidental that you mentioned measurement, because there's a question here asking where you anticipate Compassionate Australia being in 5 years. Do you have any plan now that you're officially a continent? Are you going to relax for a little while, or?
Well, we're not officially a continent in the way that you'd say Compassionate Ballarat is officially a compassionate city, because the City Council has signed the Charter and has embedded it into its work. It is an intention as Terry mentioned, we are very aware of the geographical space and that we are we still need to move into the West and the South. So South Australia and Western Australia and Northern Territory, that is something that we are planning to do, to get specific connections, and that could be through the cities or through the sectors. We might find that we identify the head of a sector in WA, could be arts or environment. That is something we are planning to do, and then of course continue rolling out the National Day again next year. We will. That will all evolve as we evolve and the charter evolves. I think if we're here in 5 years, we'll be doing very well. But we certainly want to expand the work that we're doing and through our sectors. Sue or Debbie, did you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment. I think one of the things that's been very exciting for us in Australia is to see this year in particular, because of the National Day, it sort of provided the foundation for us to really reach out, network, and very broadly. And we found that there was great interest in other people and organisations in contributing to our National Day, being part of the interviews. And so we found that this has been a very valuable strategy. And as we know, Charter for Compassion is all about connecting, it's creating connections and community building. And so we're having discussions within the council about ways to leverage that. And particularly this year, there's been a quantum leap up in terms of our network and engagement with a broad range of organisations and people, many who have, a range of influence. And one of the things I'm certainly finding at Monash, which is terrific, is because we were able to get Monash University to partner with Charter for Compassion, that now provides us and myself a platform where I present at a lot of conferences and we're involved in lots of community engagement to talk about Charter for Compassion when we're doing those presentations or having the logo up there, bringing it into curriculum training that we're doing. So I think it's very exciting what the potential is. And as we all know, in the Australian Compassion Council, and I suspect this is perhaps mirrored in other countries around the world, and be interesting when looking at some of their stories. It is quite challenging when you start off very small initially with just with volunteers. So in our early years, we were having sort of discussions about how to try to grow Charter for Compassion Australia, and we tried various strategies, some which worked really well, but to be fair, there was an enormous amount of work put in by Lynn and Terry, and Marilyn was a huge help mentoring us. And some of the strategies have really borne fruit, and there are other strategies that we found that just didn't seem to take. So the National Day has been very successful, and particularly with the resources and the interviews that we've got and that we can go back over and other people can look at, and to launch pad off from there. So I think the next 5 years, we are absolutely looking to try and keep growing Charter for Compassion Australia. And I think we probably feel that now, by 2021, as we're at the moment, we've got a very solid foundation now to really grow things in quite a strong and exciting way.
I can just add to that, Debbie. Compassion is something that it's not a nice thing that you do on Sunday morning when you've got to spare half an hour. It's a skillful means, it's a fierce attitude, and it's absolutely essential to be embedded not only at the ground where we've got people in professional jobs and in any job working with other humans. It needs to be part of the way people structure themselves together as neighbourhoods, as communities, as societies, how we structure our organisations. I think that the work of something like the Compassion Council has to be raising the awareness of compassion as an essential attitude, an essential component and a skillful means. And working with organisations is a very important part of that work, because we need to undo the trauma. We need to address the traumatised people, traumatised neighbourhoods, traumatised organisations. And compassion is a leading means in doing that. So it's a powerful weapon, not just a nice attitude to have. And I think that this structured approach to compassion at the level of a continent is necessary to start to really infuse that acceptance, that understanding, that attitude, and that knowledge. And so the work of the charter is really important in, you know, taking compassion not just at the global level that we're talking about now, but down into the street, into each individual who's got a pair of hands and a heart and who is doing a job, you know, aiming to serve the rest of humanity. So thank you.
Thank you. Our Q&A is just exploding over here, so hopefully we can get to all of it. There's a question, can you speak to how you have been able to introduce Think Equal into some of your schools?
Yeah, well, that's a really great example of where the Global Charter has endorsed a particular partner in a sector, and we've been able to embed it into the work we're doing here in Australia. So the Charter has formally endorsed Think Equal as one of its social emotional learning programs. It's been developed by very senior academics such as Richie Davidson, who do a lot of work in this area. And in Australia, we were able to run a randomised control trial of Think Equal, which is an early childhood program run over 30 weeks. We're just writing up now the outcomes of that, which found very significant improvements in children's ability to self-regulate, connect with others and themselves. And the teachers also found that this was a program that enabled them to connect with the children. We had one teacher who said, we thought we created, I mean, this is what we do, we're an early childhood centre, we create safe spaces for our children. But the children said they particularly liked Think Equal and particularly felt safe in that when they were doing exercises connected to Think Equal. And that was because Think Equal requires the teachers to integrate their what they're saying with how they're feeling and what their body language looks like. So the children knew that the teachers were saying what they were saying was how they felt, and that was very reassuring for the children. That wasn't the teachers were saying something, but really the kids were getting a different vibe from their body language. So it's been very successful. We're writing it up. We are also in the process of applying to Beyond Blue. So Beyond Blue is one of Australia's big mental health organisations that supports good mental health across adults and children in Australia, and they have a number of programs they endorse, but they need the research in order to be able to do that. So we're just in the process of finalising that application. So these are the ways in which it cascades down, and is really, very exciting. Yeah, so we're now in the process of trying to roll out Think Equal. Having done the research, then we can go to early childhood associations across Australia, asking them to take it on board. Thanks, Mimi.
For me, some of this sort of highlights the dance between organisation and organism in terms of the growth. I think what we're trying to do, and certainly our Indigenous learning and the way in which Tyson Yunkaporta and others will influence the thinking of the Australian Compassion Council. We thought we knew what we were doing. We think we've got a bit of an idea of what might happen in the next 5 years and some intentional ways of going there. But it's really quite an organic process. And I think that's what we're learning about, complex adaptive systems and wisdom. You can set out, but then you need to be flexible and you need to tweak. And I think our capacity to do that over time has been really interesting. I think the way things come together on the 21st of September and what that meant in terms of the stories that we had to tell, like by going to people and saying, please allow us to tell your story. It almost put us in a leadership position, because they were grateful that we came to share their stories, which meant that we could then have conversations about what the future looks like. And now that we've got some of these digital resources and stories, and we're gathering research from the Scholars Forum and the work of Think Equal and those sorts of things, there's all sorts of interesting opportunities that might open up for us in the media, in storytelling and film, that could really grow forward our work. So I think we're going forward, with some intentionality, but also with an openness and a responsiveness. We really don't know where this journey is taking us, but we're kind of really committed to doing what we can to pay attention to that as we go along.
Terry, it feels like you're anticipating my questions before I field them to you. There's something in chat. What can you teach other cities about your commitment to Indigenous peoples?
Well, it was always very important. We always said we could not establish a continent for compassion without our Indigenous brothers and sisters. And that's why we honoured them by including deep dreaming. That is their language, deep dreaming. We're not planning, we're not strategizing. We are coming to this through that very heartfelt, as I said, through those mind sets, story mind, ancestor mind, pattern mind. That brings us into the work we are doing in a very different format from, as I say, with deep dreaming. It's a beautiful way of connecting, and Al Harris has been an amazing Indigenous advisor and has been working with us the whole step, right along the way. I mean, one example is that I'm working with Al. Al is in Ballarat, but working with Al, one of the terrible things in Australia is the number of Indigenous people in especially young people in prison. They're 70% of the population of Indigenous, but they're of the prison population, but they're only 2% of the Australian population. So just so represented in prisons. And we're working with Al to go to the Department of Justice and try and get some funding to do a new approach to young people to sort of stop them, before they get into trouble and antisocial behaviour. And that's all about them being passionate about their own culture. I mean, really, one of the terrible, terrible things that we did in Australia was just not ignore and wipe out the Indigenous history and knowledge. So that's what we're wanting to bring to the work that we're doing. And we're working with Initiatives of Change, and Uncle Shane Charles is on a committee or the reconciliation group in Victoria, because Victorian government is wanting to have a treaty with our Indigenous peoples here in Victoria. So there's again the ways in which we're connecting.
I think the other thing that's important to say is that the deep dreaming, the way that we connect with that, and the first step in that is deep listening. And so it really involves us slowing ourselves down and gently putting ourselves in relationship to First Nations people and listening to the stories and the hurts but also the hopes, because here I am in kind of Queensland, and we're involved in this kind of deep listening process at the moment. And despite some of the horrific things that have happened to our First Nations people, there is this sense of common humanity. There's this sense of, if you're born here, you're one of us, you belong to the land, and we can work this out. We need to work together. So for Australia, it's how do we tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about our history. But in the same way, to also acknowledge that, the Indigenous culture and history wasn't without its own, dark side as well. And our sense of common humanity and compassion and wisdom need to come into play to work out from our deep listening how we continue the deep dreaming into a new future together.
Thank you so much. We are getting close to wrapping up, but I want to make sure, Terry, that you saw a message from Marianne from Minnesota in chat. Did you catch that? Otherwise, I can just read that to you.
Yeah, look, I hope that I might have addressed that earlier, and be happy.
Yeah, I thought so too. I wasn't sure.
Yeah, but happy to
Marianne,
have a
I'll be sending an
conversation
email
offline
out. So
about
if you
that.
need to
Yes.
get in touch, yeah, we can take it offline.
Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you everybody who attended. And as I said, a recording will go out to everyone who registered in the next couple of days. I want to invite everyone to sign up for the charter newsletters, where you can get information about all of our upcoming events, but two that may be of specific interest to you is we'll have our next communities webinar in November, and we'll be featuring Compassionate Las Vegas. And I will send information for that with this recording. And the other thing is we have our global gala November 20th, and we would love all of you to be there. We have a pretty stellar lineup of music and poetry and honorees that you will be just enthralled with. So I'll drop that link here in the chat box if you want to grab it, but I will also include it in mailing that I send following this webinar. Thank you all. It's a pleasure to work with you, and I'm so glad we could showcase all of the incredible things that you are doing in Australia.
Great. Thank you so much, Mimi.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Bye from down under. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.